Hi everyone. Tonight, we step directly into a place where the cold does not wait for permission. It forces its way inside, creeps through every gap in the walls, and settles deep into your bones before you have fully woken. Imagine yourself in the heart of a medieval winter. Dawn is only just beginning. Frost traces pale patterns along the edge of a small window, and a draft sharp enough to sting brushes your skin. You pull the nearest worn blanket closer, but it barely helps. The reality is simple. Without fire, shared body heat, or stubborn endurance, this night could easily defeat you. Before we continue, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of content. And feel free to share your location and local time in the comments. I enjoy picturing where listeners are tuning in from. Now, lower the lights. Your toes press into the rough rush matting on the floor. It feels damp despite being frozen solid. That contradiction defines medieval mornings. Cold that seeps inward and moisture that refuses to leave. The air is so heavy with frost that each breath burns as it passes your throat. The first sound you notice is not birds, but the snap and groan of wooden beams tightening under the night's freeze. Wrapped in a coarse wool tunic, you pull at a blanket packed with straw, hoping some part of you can catch a hint of warmth. In this period, everyday life begins and ends with cold. The accepted historical picture is straightforward. Most people lived in timber or wattle and daub huts with minimal insulation, and indoor temperatures rarely rose much above those outdoors. Archaeological evidence from early medieval northern Europe shows packed earth floors, thin walls, and wide gaps beneath roofs that welcomed winter winds without apology. Comfort was a privilege few could even imagine. Still, people adapted. You notice smoke rising from a nearby hearth, a hopeful sign that someone's fire lasted through the night. Your own home has no chimney yet. The hearth smolders at the center of the room, smoke clinging to the rafters before slowly escaping through an opening in the roof. You cough, eyes watering, but that irritation is reassuring. Smoke means the fire is not completely dead. Beneath yesterday's ash, a cluster of embers might still be alive. With careful breath and dry twigs, they could return to flame. Lose them, and you face hours of shaking cold before borrowing fire from a neighbor. Warmth here is not comfort. It is a form of currency tied directly to survival. One lesser-known detail often surprises people. To preserve embers overnight, some households stored them in clay pots or covered iron containers, early versions of fire safes. Coals were buried in ash and sealed so they could be revived at dawn. The popular image of people striking flint every morning is misleading. Fire was rare and closely guarded, almost like a member of the family. If your embers failed, you might walk through snow to request a coal from someone else, carrying it home in a pot wrapped in wool like an infant. As you move toward the hearth, breath visible in the dim light, you recall how historians still debate whether medieval winters were harsher than modern ones, or if the so-called Little Ice Age overstated the suffering. Some argue the worst cold came later, during the Renaissance, when even major rivers froze solid. But for anyone sitting in a stone hut in January, that debate feels distant. The cold was harsh enough. You stir the embers. Sparks jump, and for a moment, it feels like a small miracle. That faint glow is worth more than gold. A thin wave of warmth touches your fingers. Not enough to truly heat you, but enough to offer hope. Your family begins to move. Children groan. An older parent sneezes loudly. All eyes turn to you. Will the fire return? In that smoky circle, you feel the weight of generations who judged their mornings not by comfort, but by whether the ember survived. Outside, dawn is slow and weak. Snow crunches as the village comes to life. Some carry bundles of sticks. Others head to barns to tend animals shivering in their stalls. Frost coats every thatched roof, turning the settlement into a pale, silent sketch. You pull your wool tighter, knowing that today, like every winter day, will be a steady contest with the cold. Yet there is also routine in this hardship. You know how to tuck your feet beneath you while sitting, how to warm your hands around a clay cup once porridge is ready, how to angle your body toward the hearth so every trace of smoke-stained heat reaches your skin. You know the morning will feel endless, but eventually the sun will climb higher, and the cold will soften into something tolerable. Smoke fills your lungs again, sharp but familiar. As you coax flame from ember, you begin to believe you might endure another day in this frozen world. This is not luxury. It is not comfort. It is survival, measured one ember at a time. The glow strengthens, climbing higher as the hearth comes back to life. You edge closer, stretching out your hands, though the heat does not travel far. This is not a modern fireplace, but a shallow pit or rough stone ring set into the floor. Smoke twists upward unpredictably, lingering under the roof as if unwilling to leave until it has darkened every beam. Your eyes sting, tears forming, lungs straining, but you remain close. This flame is more than fire. It is the center of everything. The open hearth serves many roles at once. It heats, it feeds, and it gathers people together. Your entire day will return to this spot. Bread is warmed on iron pokers. Stews simmer in hanging pots. Children wander too near and are quickly pulled back, parents scolding as they protect them from sparks. Historically, medieval households revolved around the hearth both physically and socially. It was not tucked away in a corner. It stood in the middle of the room, demanding constant care. There is also a less practical side. Hearth fires were sometimes viewed as spiritually alive. People murmured charms over them, made signs of protection when lighting them, and placed certain herbs in the flames. Some traditions held that allowing the fire to die brought misfortune or even foretold death. The hearth was seen as a guardian of the home, not just a source of heat. Imagine lying down at night knowing that carelessness could offend not only your family, but unseen forces as well. Even so, historians still debate how effective open hearths truly were. Some argue they produced very little heat in drafty cottages or large halls. Others suggest that psychological warmth mattered more than physical temperature. Light and flame eased the sense of cold, even when the air barely warmed. It is one of those questions where measurements fall short. You can calculate heat, but you cannot easily measure the comfort of moving shadows on a winter night. As you sit beside the fire, your knees tingling with heat while a cold draft chills your back, you begin to sense that the hearth sets the rhythm of village life. A neighbor rushes in, knocking snow from her boots, carrying a small pot. She asks for a few embers to relight her own hearth and promises bread in return the next day. This exchange feels ordinary. It is part of daily routine. Embers are shared as casually as salt, and the fire connects the entire community. The scent of charred wood, the sharp crack of resin in pine logs, and the soft hiss when damp wood is added all blend into the steady pulse of winter survival. Yet danger is always present. A spark leaps out and lands on your tunic. You strike it away quickly, your pulse quickening, aware of how a brief lapse could turn your home into ruins. Medieval villages caught fire often. A single stray ember or a neglected flame could erase half a settlement in a single night. The open hearth was never harmless. It offered warmth, but it also carried risk, earning both respect and fear. You consider how children must have been raised with constant lessons in watching fire, learning early how to feed it, contain it, and guard it. A home without careful supervision stood close to disaster. The smell of smoke clung to everything: clothes, hair, skin. It never truly faded. Walking through the village, you could tell who had been near the hearth by the faint trace of char that followed everyone. In its own way, it was the scent of survival. By midday, the hearth settles into a steady pattern, no longer blazing but glowing. The embers are banked to last into the evening. A pot of stew simmers quietly. Someone places damp boots nearby, hoping they will dry before morning. A dog curls up on the floor, belly toward the heat, sighing as if it understands comfort better than anyone. And you, half smoked and half warmed, recognize that this small fire pit is the narrow line separating life from death in a winter that offers no mercy. Shadows ripple across soot-darkened beams, reminding you that this is only the beginning. The hearth is not a convenience. It is a fragile flame on which your entire existence depends. Without it, you would not survive the week. With it, you can at least sit for a few hours and imagine that warmth has a place in a world largely defined by cold. The air grows thick, not with heat, but with a stubborn haze that refuses to clear. You sit close to the open fire, eyes stinging, throat coated in soot, and you wonder whether breathing in winter might be more dangerous than freezing. The hearth burns in a shallow pit, but without a proper chimney, the smoke follows its own course, creeping into the beams, curling along the rafters, spreading until you can barely see your hands. The experience is contradictory. This fire keeps you alive, yet it also leaves you coughing. The historical reality is blunt. Before chimneys became common in the late medieval period, most homes relied on a simple opening in the roof to release smoke. In theory, it guided the haze outside. In practice, smoke wandered freely, often making interiors nearly unbearable during cooking. The blackened rafters found in medieval cottages and halls confirm this. Archaeologists uncover layers of soot and tar baked into the wood over centuries, like permanent stains. Still, there was a practical side to this suffocating environment. An interesting detail often noted is that smoke, while unpleasant, helped protect timbers from insects, worked as a rough disinfectant, and cured meat hung from the rafters. You cough and struggle for breath, yet you also chew on smoked bacon whose flavor exists because of this unintended preservation. The air may be harsh, but your meal benefits from the same smoldering cloud. Historians continue to debate how people endured such conditions. Some argue that medieval populations adapted, their lungs adjusting in ways difficult for us to imagine. Others suggest that heavy smoke was seasonal, with intense fires mainly during the winter months. There is no clear agreement on whether these conditions significantly shorten lives. You imagine scholars bent over fragile texts, disputing whether smoke was a quiet killer or a manageable inconvenience, while you, coughing in this mental reconstruction, might be tempted to settle the matter by pointing to your burning eyes. Your nose runs, your head throbs, and the fire crackles cheerfully, indifferent to your discomfort. You crouch lower, angling yourself to catch as much warmth as possible while still struggling to breathe. Children hide under blankets, peering out cautiously, their hair permanently carrying the smell of smoke. When visitors arrive, you laugh uneasily and wave at the haze, as though shooing away a stray animal. The truth is that no medieval home escaped it. Every house, hall, and kitchen lived under the same veil. At times, the smoke transforms the room into a stage of shadows. Sunlight slips through the roof opening, slicing the haze into bright shafts that scatter like golden blades. Dust motes drift among flecks of ash, creating a strange beauty that almost distracts you from the smell. For a moment, you can imagine sitting back, half suffocated, yet absorbed by how light moves through smoke. It briefly resembles a chapel, lit by sunbeams instead of stained glass. The illusion fades when your eyes burn again. You tie a cloth over your mouth, a simple trick passed from parent to child when the air grows too harsh. It offers little real protection, but it provides comfort in the idea of it. Your skin itches, and when you step outside, the cold air feels like relief, sharp and clean despite the frost. You breathe deeply, lungs aching from the chill, but grateful for clarity. Even so, you always return indoors. Outside holds only cold and emptiness. Inside, at least, the hearth still glows. You sit again, coughing but warming your fingers over the coals. The contradiction becomes familiar. The smoke turns into an unwanted companion you cannot escape. Evening is the hardest time. The fire is built up for cooking. The roof opening is too small. The room fills with both laughter and rough coughs. Someone sings, another stirs the stew, a child sneezes, and all of you remain in the dim twilight of endurance. You joke about the smoke even as it roughens your voice. You understand that in a medieval winter, the choice is not between comfort and discomfort. It is between breathing smoke and not breathing at all. The smoke hangs heavily, but warmth does not come only from the fire. It comes from people pressed close together around it, shoulders touching, breath mixing in the dim air. You shift on a hard bench, your knee brushing against another's, your blanket pulled tighter because a sibling has claimed more than their share. Privacy is rare. Survival depends on cooperation. The historical record supports this. Medieval families, especially peasants, often slept in a single shared space, crowded together against the cold. Reconstructions of cottages reveal open rooms rather than separate bedrooms, with livestock sometimes sharing the floor to add warmth. The idea of a single-family bed was not unusual. It was a practical response to winter. There is also a detail that invites a dry smile. In some places, entire communities practiced bundling, where travelers or guests were invited to share beds with strangers to prevent freezing. Planks or heavy sacks might separate bodies for modesty, but closeness was unavoidable. Social discomfort mattered less than survival. You were not concerned with conversation. You were concerned with waking up alive. Even so, scholars still debate how widespread this level of shared intimacy truly was. Some argue that peasants routinely kept animals indoors at night, goats, pigs, even chickens, to use their body heat as a natural source of warmth. Others counter that these claims were overstated by later writers keen to portray medieval life as filthy and uncivilized. The reality likely falls somewhere between these positions, and as you lie here with a calf-chewing cud only a few feet away, you might think the scholarly debate misses the lived reality. The animal's warmth is real, whether or not it feels dignified. Your body settles deeper into a rough bedding of wool and straw, the mattress itching against your legs. Heat seeps in from another person's back pressed against yours. It is far from pleasant. Someone snores heavily. Another thrashes in their sleep. Still, there is no denying that the cold feels less harsh when it is shared. The air carries the scent of sweat, smoke, and damp wool. It is unpleasant, yet familiar, even oddly comforting. There is a pattern to this shared endurance. At dusk, everyone crowds in. The youngest are tucked deepest into the layered blankets, the oldest placed closest to the fire where they can be tended more easily. In the dead of night, someone rises to feed the embers, muttering complaints about the cold before slipping back beneath the covering. You wake briefly, confused, then drift off again to the steady sound of breathing, the low shuffle of animals nearby, and the soft hiss of the fire settling into ash. A thought intrudes. What happens when illness appears? You sneeze once, then again, and imagine sickness spreading through the shared bed before morning. Medieval people accepted this danger. In that moment, cold posed a more immediate threat than disease. So you turn your face into a woolen sleeve and hope your cough goes unnoticed. Yet there is also tenderness in this closeness. Children press against their mother's sides. Fathers curl protectively around infants. Siblings whisper jokes long after darkness fills the room. Warmth binds you not only physically but emotionally. Without fire, without insulation, without any form of central heating, the human body becomes the last reliable furnace. You recall the previous night, when the fire nearly went out and only layered bodies kept the frost from biting too deeply. The memory brings a shiver now, not from cold, but from gratitude. Smoke may fill the house. Drafts may slip through the walls like thieves. But as long as bodies stay close, there is a chance of enduring the longest nights. Somewhere in the dark, a dog shifts, sighs, and nudges its nose under the edge of a blanket. You smile faintly at the strangeness of sharing not just warmth but sleep with animals, children, and adults tangled into a single mass. You close your eyes, knowing this arrangement is not about comfort. It is about survival, plain and simple. And survival in a medieval winter is an achievement worth every cramped, smoky, sweat-soaked inch. You wake with straw stuck in your hair and a draft crawling across your skin, sharp as a blade. The fire has burned down again, reduced to gray ash with a dull red center. The room is quiet, your breath forming pale curls that linger briefly before dissolving into the smoky gloom. As you look around the cottage, the truth is obvious. These walls are no defense. A widely accepted historical fact sets the scene. Most medieval peasant cottages were built from wattle and daub, thin wooden frames interwoven with sticks and coated in a mixture of mud, clay, and sometimes animal dung. Roofs were thatched. Floors were nothing more than packed earth. Archaeologists examining preserved examples in Britain and Northern Europe note how temporary these buildings often were, many lasting only a few decades before falling apart. They held up reasonably well against summer rain. Against winter winds, they offered little more than token resistance. You move closer to the wall and feel it. Moisture seeps through, sending a cold dampness inward, as if the night itself is pressing against you. Your hand brushes the plaster, which flakes slightly, carrying the faint smell of soil and decay. There is insulation of a sort, but only the most basic kind, layers of dung mixed into the daub to block drafts. It helps, to a degree. Here is a small but telling detail. People often smeared fresh dung along wall seams each autumn, a routine task much like modern weatherproofing. Imagine a household list that reads, mend roof, patch wall, smear dung. Children were sometimes given this chore, small hands pushing the foul-smelling mixture into cracks. It was not pleasant work, but in a world without modern materials, animal dung served as the medieval equivalent of a hardware store. Even so, historians continue to debate just how harsh these cottages were during winter. Some argue that the number of people crammed inside, entire families, sometimes with livestock, generated enough heat to keep the worst cold away. Others maintain that even with smoke and dung-lined walls, indoor temperatures barely stayed above freezing, leaving occupants constantly chilled. As so often, the truth likely sits between these views: warm enough to live, too cold to ever feel truly comfortable. You edge toward the embers, coughing as ash stirs. The walls creak under the wind, and through gaps in the thatch, snowflakes sometimes drift down like unwelcome guests. You brush one from your blanket, half amused, half discouraged. Outside, the fields lie silent under frost. Inside, the cottage feels less like protection and more like a leaking container barely holding the world at bay. Still, you manage. Holes are stuffed with rags. Old cloaks are hung over gaps. Straw is wedged between wall and roof. It is never perfect, but it dulls the cold. Some families even stretched animal hides over the coldest walls, turning skins into crude windbreaks. The smell lingered, certainly, but so did a bit more warmth. As morning unfolds, you notice how these walls shape your routine. You work closer to the hearth, stay longer in bed, and avoid corners where frost creeps in. Heat is uneven here. The space has zones: hot near the fire, bitter at the walls, tolerable in between. You adjust without thinking, your body learning where to sit, where to sleep, and where not to linger. Water begins to drip as a patch of snow melts through the thatch. You mutter and slide a pot beneath it, reminded that your home is in constant negotiation with the elements. The elements usually win, but you keep repairing, adjusting, and enduring. When you finally step outside into the snow, you almost laugh. The cottage looks as though it belongs. Its thatched roof is white like the ground, its walls blending into the earth. It is weak, yes, but also part of the landscape, a dwelling shaped from mud and dung, fragile yet persistent. You know you will curse its drafts again tonight, but for now you give it a nod of reluctant respect. It still stands, and so do you. The wind sweeps across the open fields, rattling shutters. When you enter the nobleman's hall, what strikes you first is not quiet or splendor, but scale. The ceiling rises high overhead. Beams are dark with soot. Banners stir slightly in the moving air. At the center, a fire burns with an authority no peasant hearth could match. Logs as thick as your arm are stacked high, flames reaching toward the rafters, sparks snapping sharply. For a moment, it feels like another world. But reality soon becomes clear. The commonly accepted historical view is straightforward. The medieval Great Hall, the core of a lord's household, was designed for assembly, feasting, and displays of power. Its hearth was often vast, first set in the middle of the floor and later moved toward a wall with a hood to manage smoke. These fires devoured immense quantities of wood each day, sometimes entire cartloads, reflecting both wealth and the difficulty of warming such enormous rooms. Records describe teams of servants whose sole job was to cut, carry, and feed the fire without pause. And here is the ironic detail. Despite its impressive size, the fire did little to heat the hall evenly. Guests frequently complained of being scorched on the side facing the flames while their backs remained bitterly cold. The nobility occupied raised platforms at one end of the hall, positioned closer to the fire, while servants and visitors shivered farther down the space. The appearance of warmth mattered more than the actual heat. A blazing hearth sent a clear message. This is the home of someone wealthy enough to burn through an entire forest in a single winter. Historians still argue over whether these grand halls functioned mainly as heating spaces or as symbolic displays of power and status. Some believe they were poorly suited for everyday winter living, designed instead for ceremonies and feasts rather than comfort. Others suggest that shared company, music, conversation, and food compensated for the cold, making the hall livable in a social sense. Standing there with your face warmed and your back chilled, it feels less like an academic debate and more like a physical reality. You edge forward, slipping closer to the circle of heat, while behind you the hall carries echoes of coughing and low complaints. Servants hurry past with armloads of firewood, cheeks flushed from heat and smoke, eyes narrowed against drifting embers. Dogs stretch out near the hearth's edge, instinctively claiming the warmest ground. Above, smoke coils into the rafters before slowly finding its way toward roof vents. Much of it lingers, however, and before long your cloak carries its smell. The fire's crackle fills the space, a steady backdrop beneath conversation. You picture the lord at his table, lit by flickering orange light, his cup catching the glow as he gestures broadly. Behind him, tapestries stir slightly in the draught, their scenes of hunts and battles offering more decoration than insulation, though they soften the sharpest edge of the stone's cold. Servants arrive with trenchers of hot meat, the scent blending with wood smoke until hunger distracts from discomfort. Even so, the contradiction remains clear. This is splendor paired with inefficiency. The fire consumes wood eagerly, yet the hall stays cold. Guests pull cloaks tighter, slide chairs nearer, or linger close to the flames when rank allows. Those outside might envy such a fire, but its comfort is less than imagined. You watch logs collapse inward, sparks leaping upward. A young boy rushes in with fresh wood, nearly slipping as he feeds the flames. He smiles despite the risk. For a servant, warmth is brief, so it is taken whenever possible. The hall feels alive, yet cold quickly reclaims corners and shadows, a constant reminder that stone, however richly adorned, offers little kindness in winter. As night deepens, music begins and the hall fills with laughter, ale, and song. Still, even nobles draw their cloaks closer and inch toward the hearth. The fire roars, smoke curls, banners shift, and you continue to shiver. Wealth can purchase spectacle, but comfort is never guaranteed. The banners along the walls sway gently as sparks rise, but your attention shifts to the walls themselves. Towering stone surfaces catch the fire's glow only to absorb it, leaving edges dark and chilled. Cold seems to seep from the stone, as though winter is stored within it. You pull your cloak tighter and then notice something striking. Long fabric hangings cover sections of the walls, woven with scenes of hunts, saints, and floral designs. They move faintly in the draught, yet they change the room in a way bare stone cannot. Historical records clearly show that nobles invested heavily in tapestries and textiles not just for display, but for insulation. Accounts describe how these fabrics were draped over stone to lessen the biting cold. They functioned like medieval wallpaper, movable, colorful, and unexpectedly useful. When nobles traveled between castles, tapestries traveled too, carefully rolled and loaded into carts so no hall remained cold and empty for long. These textiles often carried meaning beyond warmth. A single tapestry could insulate a wall and tell a story at the same time, showing lineage, religious themes, or political messages. Guests would gaze not only at the fire, but at visual reminders of their host's authority. There is also an interesting detail. Some households hung painted cloths coated with wax to resist dampness, turning walls into layered displays of protection and prestige. Even so, historians disagree on how effective these hangings truly were. Some argue that even thick wool or linen could do little more than soften drafts creeping through stone. Others claim that in an era where every layer mattered, the small physical benefit combined with psychological comfort justified the expense. The debate continues because surviving cloth fragments and inventory lists offer clues, but not the full sensory experience of sitting in a castle in midwinter. You step closer, brushing your fingers along the edge of a hanging. The surface feels coarse, the threads slightly oily from lanolin, with a faint earthy scent. You imagine servants climbing ladders to secure these panels, shaking them out in summer and beating dust from them in autumn, preparing for another winter cycle. They serve as both decoration and defense, softening a space otherwise dominated by stone and smoke. Where fabric covers the walls, the hall feels changed. It becomes less a cavern and more a chamber. Shadows seem warmer. Colors glow in the firelight, and the stone no longer bites as sharply. A dog settles nearer the wall, curling up where the draft has weakened. You realize that medieval warmth relied on layers, not a single solution. Fire, people, fabric, and stone all work together, imperfectly but persistently. Servants adjust a sagging hanging, and you think of the labor behind it. Spinners, weavers, dyers, all contributing to this single piece. Every thread handled by hand, every pattern deliberate. In a world where nothing was inexpensive, a tapestry was more than ornament. It was practical art for survival. Families might sit with their backs against it at night, letting its fibers absorb some of the room's cold, regardless of the noble symbols stitched across it. You step into a corner without a hanging and feel the change immediately. The stone radiates cold like ice. Your skin tightens, breath fogs quickly, and you instinctively move back toward the fabric's shelter. It becomes clear that medieval people understood this not as theory, but as daily experience. No measurements are needed. The cold is felt directly. Of course, hangings had limits. During severe frost, the hall still felt vast and drafty. Cold slipped under doors, and warmth reached only as far as the fire allowed. Yet human perception fills what physics cannot. Rich colors change how space feels. You are not only warmer, you feel warmer. That belief alone may have helped people endure long winters. Later, guests arrive for a feast. They admire the shining hangings, comment on their beauty, and whisper about their cost. The host smiles, aware he has impressed them not only with food and fire, but with walls that tell stories. Walls that block more than cold. They also block any hint of poverty. You lean back and reflect on how warmth in this world is never purely physical. It is symbolic, emotional, and social. To hang a tapestry is to show care for comfort, culture, and rank all at once. The cold remains unforgiving, but so does the human desire to resist it with both function and beauty. As the night wears on, you rest against the fabric, your head settling beneath a woven deer frozen mid-leap. The fire crackles, the hall hums, and for a brief moment the stone beneath you no longer feels like an enemy. Instead, you are wrapped in color, sound, and heat. It is a small success, fragile but real, woven into layers of wool meant to last through the season. Gradually, the room grows quieter. The flames sink into glowing embers. Still, the cold returns, probing patiently for any weakness. Your eyes lift toward the windows, dark openings in the wall that feel less like protection and more like open doors for frost. You draw your arms in closer, understanding instinctively that medieval windows were rarely helpful in resisting winter. One well-documented reality of the period is that most peasant homes had windows that were little more than empty gaps, sometimes sealed with wooden shutters, sometimes covered with cloth or thin leather. In wealthier houses, oiled parchment was stretched over wooden frames, allowing dim light inside while blocking part of the draft. Glass did exist, but it was extraordinarily costly, limited to churches, monasteries, and the grandest castles. Even there, it was uneven, full of bubbles, and assembled from small pieces held together with lead strips rather than the clear sheets familiar today. There is an interesting contradiction here. Even when a lord could afford glass, color was often chosen for appearance. Picture trying to make use of scarce winter sunlight through panes tinted green or amber, attractive to look at but hardly efficient. Such windows impressed guests, yet left residents squinting in low light while cold air slipped through the joints. Wealth made a visual statement, but it did not guarantee warmth. Scholars still debate how effective parchment or horn windows truly were. Some believe these thin coverings softened the light but offered little defense against cold. Others argue that even a minimal barrier reduced wind enough to make a difference. The evidence remains limited. Few medieval homes survive in full form, and written records tend to focus on ownership and taxes rather than daily comforts. Standing here, fingers stiff from the draft, it is easy to agree with the doubters. Parchment may weaken the wind, but it does not stop the shiver. You step closer and press against a shutter. It creaks and vibrates, its surface worn and uneven, and a rush of icy air slips through a gap. You force it closed again, pulse quickening. It never seals properly. It never has. Cold reaches in through every crack, reminding you that winter needs no permission. You push a rag into the seam, hoping it helps, though you know the effort is temporary. The daylight that enters through these openings is faint and dull, more shadow than illumination. You imagine mornings spent in half-darkness, mistaking rooms for dawnless twilight. You squint while stirring the hearth, stumble as you search for tools. Sunlight never fills the space. It seeps in slowly, scattering through smoke and soot until the room feels closer to a cave than a living chamber. When night arrives, shutters are drawn tight, and you rely entirely on firelight and rush lamps. Still, there is adaptability here. Families learned small methods to cope. Extra cloth or worn cloaks were hung across windows to add layers. Some angled shutters inward or sealed edges with clay during the cold months. In towns, houses were built close together, sharing walls so fewer sides faced the wind. Every small change mattered. Outside, the wind grows louder, rattling through gaps like an unwanted visitor. You picture snow piling against the outer wall, pressing against shutters, frosting their edges. When you touch the wood, it is cold to the hand, a reminder that life here is not sheltered behind glass and stone, but lived in constant compromise with the elements. Survival depends on adjustment. There is a certain quiet beauty in that. On clear mornings, sunlight catches the oiled parchment and makes it glow softly, like amber. Through it, you glimpse moving shapes, villagers bent under bundles of firewood, children following behind, dogs darting through snow. The window is flawed, yet it connects you to the world beyond the walls, proof that life continues even in deep winter. By evening, however, its shortcomings return. Drafts creep across the floor, snuffing candles and chilling bare feet. You move closer to the fire, muttering about shutters that refuse to stay closed, and you question whether comfort is possible at all. Then you remember that people lived this way not briefly, but for centuries. They repaired, layered, and adjusted, not because their solutions were perfect, but because they were enough. The window rattles again, its hinge groaning in the dim room. You sigh, then allow a faint smile. This is winter's sound, made not by snow alone, but by wood, cloth, and parchment struggling against the night. Sitting here, wrapped in your cloak, you are part of the same struggle. The window rattles once more, but you turn away. True shelter waits in the corner, the bed. It is not a soft mattress with springs and sheets as you might imagine, but a simple nest, straw packed into a sack, layered with linen, wool, and whatever scraps of fur can be found. It appears unimpressive, yet once inside, you understand its purpose. This bundle is designed to trap every bit of heat your body produces, acting like a small furnace. Written accounts confirm that bedding was the medieval household's most dependable defense against freezing nights. Poor families slept on straw pallets, often sharing them. Wealthier households piled feather beds, blankets, and furs until sleepers disappeared beneath heavy layers. Archaeological evidence even suggests that some beds were enclosed with wooden frames or curtains, forming warm pockets where breath lingered and frost stayed away. In coastal areas, people sometimes used hay or dried seaweed as mattress filling. Whatever material was available was stuffed into sacks and replaced when it became damp or stale. Comfort was not the goal. Insulation was. Imagine resting on a mattress that crackles with dried reeds, less softness and more shelter. In winter, that sound was reassuring. It meant there was something between you and the frozen floor. Experts still debate how much privacy or comfort these beds provided. Some believe heavy curtains served warmth as much as modesty. Others argue they also displayed status, richly dyed or embroidered in a world where cloth was a sign of wealth. Whatever the reason, the enclosed bed became a defining feature of medieval domestic life. You climb in now, feeling the prick of straw beneath the wool. It scratches through the linen at first, but as you settle, it compresses and shapes itself to you. The blanket above is heavy and steady. You tuck it beneath your body, sealing in the heat. Within minutes, Your own breath creates a pocket of warmth. Inside the curtains, firelight fades to a dim glow. You hear the house settling, wood shifting, the dog moving nearby, the wind slipping past shutters. But here, the world feels distant. Even the cold seems to pause, held back by wool, fur, and tightly drawn fabric. There are dangers, of course. A stray ember could ignite bedding in moments. Stories tell of sleepers waking to smoldering straw, scrambling to extinguish sparks before flames took hold. The scent of smoke could signal welcome warmth in the hall, yet inside the bed it often meant fear. Parents cautioned children never to pull glowing embers too near. Even so, when the cold became unbearable, someone would take the risk. Despite these hazards, the bed remained the place where families found not only heat, but reassurance. Children pressed close to their parents. Brothers and sisters shared furs. Couples spoke softly in the dark. This closeness was driven by need, but it also strengthened family ties. You can picture yourself lying shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air, while heavy bed curtains block out drafts and, just as importantly, the loneliness of the long night. When sleep finally comes, the effect feels almost remarkable. Outside the bed, the world may be frozen hard, but inside, layers of cloth form a small furnace. Time seems to slow. Dreams drift easily within this sheltered space. This may explain why medieval writers often described sleep as blessed, even sacred. It was the one moment when the cold lost its grip, when the body could truly rest. Morning would arrive with aching joints and bits of straw tangled in your hair. You would sneeze at the dust, shake out the bedding, and complain as cold air rushed in the moment you stood. But for now, you understand how a sack of straw and a heap of blankets could rank among the most valued tools for surviving winter. As you rise, the straw beneath you still crackles, and your body protests after hours in the same position. The fire has burned down once more, leaving only gray ash and a faint, hidden glow. You reach for something comforting before you face the chill of the room. Then you recall the household practice passed along through generations: hot stones and warming pans. Medieval household records clearly show that people often depended on heated objects to bring warmth into their beds. Smooth stones were placed in embers or near the hearth until they held heat, then wrapped in cloth to prevent burns before being tucked beneath the covers. In wealthier homes, metal warming pans filled with coals were slid under the blankets and moved slowly back and forth to drive out damp cold. The heat did not last, but during those first moments of climbing into bed, the relief felt profound. Some households extended this practice even further. Written accounts mention bricks, tiles, and even iron tools heated and used as improvised warmers. Farmers sometimes kept small pots of embers near their feet, trusting their glow to carry them into sleep. In colder regions, families were known to keep warmed stones wrapped through the night, drawing them into bed almost like living companions. Picture holding a carefully bundled rock, thankful not for company, but for the stubborn warmth it retained. Historians do not fully agree on how common warming pans were outside noble households. Some argue that the metal needed to make them was too expensive for peasants, who likely relied on stones and tiles instead. Others suggest that simpler pans with wooden handles, filled with hot sand, may have been within reach for better-off villagers. The lack of clear archaeological proof keeps this debate unresolved, though it matters little when you place a hot stone by your feet and exhale with relief. You reach toward the hearth, carefully pulling a flat stone from the ashes. Its edges glow faintly, far too hot to touch. You quickly wrap it in cloth and hold it gingerly, warmth seeping into your stiff fingers. For a moment, you close your eyes and imagine this single stone as a small sun, modest but effective, offering just enough heat to push back the frost. You slip it into the bedding and notice a thin wisp of steam rise from the cloth as the cold retreats. The air carries the sharp smell of scorched fabric, making you wince. You know the danger well. Too much heat, and the stone could scorch or even ignite the bedding. Families learned caution early. Children were warned never to touch the warming pan once it slid beneath the sheets, as burns would come instantly. Stories spread of careless servants who left coals too long and awoke to smoldering mattresses. In winter, fire served as both protector and threat, and nowhere was that balance felt more closely than in the bed itself. As the stone begins to cool, you curl your toes around it, enjoying the last traces of warmth. The feeling moves up your legs like a fading memory of summer. You know it will not endure. Within an hour, the stone will be cold again, no different from the floor. Yet that short relief is enough to settle you into sleep, easing the constant discomfort of drafts. You consider how many nights across history were made tolerable by such simple measures. How many people quietly gave thanks to a stone, a tile, or a pan of coals? How many nights might have been impossible without this small, practical solution? It is humbling to realize that survival often depended not on grand halls or towering castles, but on a rock lifted from the fire and wrapped with care. The embers stir again, and you know another stone could be heated if needed. Tonight, you will sleep not in luxury, but in balance, shivering less because you have carried a piece of the hearth into the dark. When dawn arrives, pale and cold, you will rise stiffly, shake out the bedding, and prepare once more for the nightly effort of drawing warmth into the bed. The routine is delicate, but it works. Winter outside remains harsh and indifferent, yet within your small space, a stone, a cloth, and a bit of resourcefulness separate despair from endurance. The glow of your stone fades completely, leaving you once again dependent on the hearth. The fire, vital as it was, never stood alone as the household's only flame. You notice small points of light scattered around the room, candles set in wooden holders, rush lights leaning in clay pots, short tapers dripping wax onto the floor. Their light is weak compared to the hearth's blaze, but when the fire burns low, these modest flames gain a quiet importance. Household records clearly show that medieval lighting relied mainly on three sources: candles, rush lights, and oil lamps. Candles made from tallow or beeswax offered a hint of warmth in small spaces, though their heat was minimal. Beeswax candles burned brighter and cleaner, but their cost placed them beyond the reach of most peasants. Villagers usually depended on tallow candles rendered from animal fat. These smoked, sputtered, and left a faintly rancid smell, yet in the long darkness of winter, even that odor was a fair trade for light. An interesting detail lies with rush lights, among the most common household solutions. Villagers soaked the pith of rush plants in animal fat and set them alight, creating long, thin tapers that burned unevenly. They were inexpensive, widely available, and effective, though they scattered ash and filled rooms with a greasy, sour scent. Some families even grew rushes specifically for this use, harvesting and drying them in autumn to prepare for winter nights. Imagine their soft crackle, their unsteady glow flickering like anxious fireflies in the dark. Scholars still debate how much warmth these small lights actually provided. Some argue their heat was negligible and served only to improve visibility. Others suggest that in enclosed spaces, such as bed curtains or small corners, even these flames could dull the edge of frost. With no precise measurements, the question remains open. Still, anyone who has warmed frozen hands over a candle understands the comfort of even the smallest flame. You reach for one now, adjusting it carefully. The fat sputters, releasing a thin trail of smoke, and your fingers carry the faint smell of grease. The light is dim, but you lean closer, thankful for the small circle of brightness it spreads across the table. For a brief time, the light is steady enough to let you mend a sock, jot a quick note, or simply sit and watch the shadows move. Then the flame snaps without warning, making you flinch, a reminder that even this modest source of light and warmth has a temper of its own. These flames were delicate allies. One sudden draft or a careless bump, and they vanished, throwing the room back into darkness. Children learned early to protect them, turning their bodies into shields when doors opened, crouching like sentinels around tiny stars. A candle was never just a convenience. It was a duty. You feel that burden now as you cup the rush light with your hand, noticing how the shadows stretch along the wall. And yet, despite their fragility, these small lights transformed the space entirely. The room feels less vacant with their glow, less threatening. The cold still lingers, creeping around your feet, but your eyes relax when darkness is no longer complete. Medieval nights were long, far longer than most people today imagine, extending endlessly from late afternoon dusk to the light of morning. Without these flames, the nights would have been unbearable. With them, they became manageable, and at times even gentle. There is a quiet romance in the way multiple flames move together. The hearth burns low, candles blink softly, rush lights tremble, and shadows slide across woven hangings. A child murmurs in sleep, shifting under blankets, their face faintly lit. You picture couples speaking in hushed tones by candlelight, monks copying manuscripts by rush light, guards rubbing their hands over a lantern during night watch. The flame is more than heat or illumination. It is companionship in the face of deep cold. Of course, danger was always close. A tallow candle tipping too near a thatched roof could spell catastrophe. Fire was both protector and threat, always ready to escape control. You imagine a village night when a single careless rush light fell into straw and an entire row of cottages disappeared into smoke. Every flame, no matter how small, was handled with respect and suspicion. You shelter it, but you also fear it, aware that it carries hope and destruction in equal measure. Still, you gently blow across the candle not to put it out, but to see it bend and flare. The warmth is slight, almost unnoticed. Yet in this dark, frozen room, even that hint of heat feels like a reassuring hand on your shoulder. You begin to understand that medieval life depended on the combined courage of countless small flames. Each was weak on its own, but together they formed a network of survival through the endless night. Eventually, the small lights sputter and fade as their fuel runs low, and once more the hearth becomes your primary companion. But not every medieval winter night unfolded in a smoky cottage or a drafty hall. Imagine instead walking quietly through cloistered stone corridors, sandals scraping over frozen flagstones, your breath curling like incense in the dim light. You are in a monastery now, where warmth is measured out almost as carefully as a sacred rite. Records from monastic rules, particularly those of the Benedictines, make it clear that fire was not allowed everywhere. Monks rose long before sunrise, moving into icy chapels to chant prayers, hands hidden inside their sleeves. The cloister corridors were intentionally left unheated, meant to strengthen the spirit by resisting physical comfort. Only the kitchen, the infirmary, and sometimes the refectory were reliably warmed, leaving the monks to bear the cold in silence. Visitors from the medieval period wrote of seeing ink freeze in inkwells and monks' breath hovering over manuscripts as they copied texts by hand. There is, however, a revealing detail from this world. In some monasteries, a shared warming room known as the kale factory became a valued refuge. Often it was the only place with a constant fire, and monks were permitted to gather there briefly. Picture 20 men shivering in their habits, clustering around the hearth, palms extended, trying to store enough warmth to carry back to their frozen cells. In certain regions, these kale factories evolved into quiet social centers, where murmured conversations and shared moments warmed more than just bodies. Scholars still debate how strictly these rules were applied. Some argue that ascetic orders truly banned fire from dormitories, forcing monks to endure nights in unheated stone rooms. Others believe practices varied widely, with practical abbots allowing braziers during especially harsh winters. The written rules were severe, but the instinct to survive often softened them. We may never know how consistent the reality was. Standing here, with bare feet numbed against icy floors, you suspect the stricter versions were very real. You follow the monks into the refectory. The hall is plain, but at its center a fire burns, modest yet dependable. Smoke mixes with the smell of bread and pottage. The monks eat in silence as a reader recites scripture, bowls giving off faint steam in the cold air. The fire does not heat the entire room, but its presence makes the meal bearable. Without it, eating would feel like another trial. With it, there is a fragile sense of community holding firm through the harsh season. Later, you step into the scriptorium, where scribes hunch over long desks. There is no hearth here, only a few candles struggling against the gloom. The men lean close to their pages, fingers stiff, ink slow to flow. Some wear fingerless gloves, others pause to breathe warmth onto their hands before continuing. The sound of quills scratching parchment fills the room, steady despite the cold. The manuscripts that remain from this period testify not only to patience, but to endurance. Words and images etched into parchment by men working while half frozen. Along the cloister walks, frost spreads across the stones, faintly sparkling in torchlight. The arches stand open to the elements, wind passing through without mercy. You draw your habit tighter, shoulders hunched, and wonder how many winters a person could endure this way. For the monks, however, the cold was more than hardship. It was discipline. To endure it was to share in suffering, to let the body weaken so the spirit might strengthen. Even so, you cannot help but smile at the idea of monks stealing a few extra moments in the kale factory, warming numb hands before the bell called them back. You imagine the quiet relief on their faces, the subtle pleasure as blood returned to their fingers. These small, taken comforts were as human as the prayers they spoke. Night settles in, and the dormitory is dark and still. Narrow beds line up in the shadows. There is no fire, no candle, only breath rising like pale mist. You slip beneath thin blankets, feeling the cold of the stones seep upward through the mattress. Men shift quietly, coughs echoing off the walls. The discipline is severe, yet there is also a calm acceptance, a sense that winter is part of spiritual life. Your body trembles, teeth chatter, but your heart keeps a steady rhythm. You realize that warmth here is not defined by heat alone. It exists in shared prayer, in voices chanting together in the cold, in the belief that hardship carries meaning. For these monks, survival was not the sole purpose. To shiver was to serve. To suffer was to sanctify. And so, in this frost-covered monastery, you drift into restless sleep, warmed not by fire, but by faith and the quiet resolve of men who believed the cold itself was a teacher. The echo of monastery bells lingers as you step back into village life, where not every place surrendered to icy silence. Imagine thick, fragrant steam rising and curling beneath rafters until the room itself seems to glow. You are standing inside a bathhouse, a rare and welcome escape from constant cold. Written records from medieval towns and cities confirm that public bathhouses existed across Europe, from busy London to small German villages. They were more than places for washing. They were havens of warmth. Heated by furnaces or large hearths, the baths held enough heat that steam filled the air and lingered, offering relief from the long winter chill. Patrons lingered, resting in the tubs, sharing rumors, and sometimes even eating or drinking as snow continued to stack up outside. For people used to smoke-filled cottages and icy halls, these warm, steamy chambers must have felt like entering a different world. An interesting detail appears in records from Paris and Nuremberg. Bathhouses often served a double purpose, functioning as taverns or informal social clubs. You could drink spiced wine while reclining in hot water, or pay extra to have food brought directly to your tub. Some accounts even mention musicians hired to perform while others bathed, their melodies drifting through thick clouds of steam. Picture yourself laughing with neighbors, faces flushed from the heat, while beyond the walls the city strained under winter's grip. Scholars still debate how widespread these places truly were. Some historians believe they were common and reasonably priced, open not only to nobles but also to artisans and merchants. Others argue that many bathhouses vanished by the late Middle Ages, driven out by fears of illness and growing moral suspicion. As with much of everyday medieval life, the reality likely differed from place to place, flourishing in some towns while fading in others. You may never know how accessible they truly were, but as you ease into the warm water, academic arguments lose their importance. What matters is the feeling returning to your fingers as they finally thaw. You sink lower, the water stinging with heat at first before your body slowly relaxes into it. After weeks of constant cold drafts, the sensation is intense. Being surrounded by warmth on every side is almost startling. Your skin tingles, sweat gathers at your brow, and your muscles loosen in clear relief. The air carries the scent of damp wood and herbs mixed into the water for fragrance, rosemary, thyme, perhaps even lavender if the proprietor is feeling generous. Around you, voices hum softly, steam blurring faces into indistinct shapes. Some bathers recline with closed eyes, drifting toward sleep. Others speak animatedly, grateful to talk without shivering. The bathhouse becomes a small world of comfort, a delicate pocket of heat pushing back the winter. You understand why these places were cherished. For an hour or two, the harshness of the season could be forgotten. Yet this comfort was not without danger. Fires burned beneath the vats, and accidents could cause burns or scalds. Excessive heat might leave someone faint, making the return to cold air even more perilous. Rumors also spread of bathhouses as centers of vice, leading authorities to shut many of them down in later centuries. Still, in this moment, seated in scented steam, those risks feel distant. You close your eyes and listen to the splash of water, the crackle of flames, and the muted blend of voices softened by mist. When you finally step out, your body seems to glow. The cold air strikes your skin sharply, but instead of groaning, you laugh. For a short while, the warmth stays with you, like a spark carried inside. By the time you reach home, the chill will creep back in. Drafts will return, but the bathhouse has given you something rare, a glimpse of real comfort in a season that usually denies it. You store the memory like a hidden ember. Tomorrow will bring frost, smoke, stiff joints, and visible breath. But tonight, you fall asleep still wrapped in imagined steam. The warmth of the bathhouse lingers in your thoughts. Yet in the daily, draft-filled rhythm of ordinary life, comfort often had to be drawn from smaller devices. You look across a dim room and notice a peculiar object. A shallow metal pan with a perforated lid, set on short legs or sometimes carried by a handle. It glows faintly from the embers inside, giving off a weak but welcome heat into the smoky air. This is the brazier, the medieval world's portable firebox. Household records and inventories make clear that braziers were a common solution in townhouses and wealthier rural homes alike. Filled with charcoal or hot coals taken from the main hearth, they could be moved into smaller spaces, creating warmth where a central fire could not reach. Servants carried them into bedrooms. Guild members gathered around them in meeting halls, and officials kept them burning in cold council chambers. There was also an intriguing custom in some Mediterranean regions, particularly in Spain and Italy. Families placed a brazier beneath a wooden table draped with thick cloth. Sitting around it with the fabric pulled over their legs, they created a kind of heated enclosure. This setup, later called the brasero, and comparable to the kotatsu in other cultures, turned meals into moments of shared warmth. Imagine sliding frozen feet under the cloth and finding a pocket of trapped heat waiting there. Experts still disagree over how safe and practical braziers truly were. On one side, they were clever, inexpensive, portable, and effective. On the other, the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning was serious. Written records describe entire families discovered dead after leaving a brazier burning overnight in a closed room. Some historians suggest these incidents were uncommon but widely publicized. Others argue the danger was constant and well understood. What is clear is that the brazier was both ally and threat, welcomed with relief but handled cautiously. You watch a servant pass by carrying one, the coals glowing softly, ash falling like gray snow with each step. The smell is sharp and smoky, with a metallic edge. He sets it near a small group, and they immediately move closer, stretching out their hands and exhaling in relief. The glow lights their faces, eyes closing for a moment as if they have briefly remembered what warmth is. You step nearer as well, letting the heat touch your skin. It is faint, more a suggestion of summer than the real thing, but it dulls the bite of the air. Your legs warm, your fingers loosen, and for the first time that day, your shoulders drop from their tense curl. The brazier becomes a small hearth of its own, a point that pulls people together. Around it, conversation resumes. Laughter surfaces. Even disagreements feel less sharp when no one is shaking with cold. But this comfort has clear limits. Move too far away, and the cold quickly returns. The warmth is concentrated, not shared by the whole room. Once the embers fade, the sense of ease vanishes with them. You see the servant return with tongs, stirring the coals and blowing gently until they flare again. Everyone waits, bent forward, hopeful for that brief revival. It is easy to understand why braziers came to represent both cleverness and unease. They offered a practical answer to a difficult question: how to warm large stone buildings with scarce fuel. Yet they never provided a complete solution. You could not leave them unattended without danger. You could not sleep beside them safely. Daily life required a constant negotiation with their risks, balancing appreciation and caution with every glow. As night deepens, the brazier continues to burn, its small heart of fire holding back the cold for as long as it can. You lean closer, feeling its warmth against your skin, and think that comfort in this world is always limited and temporary. Still, even a small measure of warmth, even a dull red ember resting in ash, can stand between despair and endurance. The brazier's light dims, leaving you once again reliant on the weakening hearth. Outside, wind rattles the shutters and shakes the thatch, and you can almost hear bare branches groaning in the forest beyond. Wood was the foundation of every fire, yet access to it was not guaranteed. You step into the brittle morning air, and the challenge becomes obvious. Firewood itself was a contested resource. Records from legal rolls and royal decrees show that forest access was tightly regulated across much of medieval Europe. By the 12th century, large stretches of woodland were claimed as hunting grounds for kings and nobles. Cutting wood without permission could lead to fines, beatings, or worse. Peasants gathered fallen branches and brush, but hauling home a solid log often meant risking punishment. Fire, essential for survival, was also restricted. In this unexpected corner of history, people learned to make use of every fragment available. Twigs, dry leaves, animal dung, and even tied bundles of straw were burned whenever proper logs were hard to find. In coastal areas, villagers collected seaweed, dried it, and stacked it into smoky piles for fuel. The smell was unmistakable, sharp, salty, and far from the clean crackle of oak, yet sufficient to keep a small ember alive through the night. Fuel was not chosen by taste but by availability. Historians still disagree on how serious fuel shortages became during the Middle Ages. Some maintain that woodland use was relatively sustainable in many regions, with lords planting new groves and controlling cutting to prevent collapse. Others argue that by the late medieval era, wood scarcity was real and urgent, forcing communities to turn toward alternatives such as peat and coal. Evidence varies widely by location, but the discussion highlights a single reality: firewood was never guaranteed. You lift an axe and feel its weight. The idea of walking into the Lord's forest brings both hope and anxiety. Frost-covered trees stand quietly, their trunks offering weeks of warmth, if only they could be claimed. But the punishment for illegal cutting is severe. Instead, you bend to gather fallen branches, dry and fragile, barely enough to cook a meal. Children spread through the brush, treating twigs like prizes. Their hands are red with cold, their small bundles tied with string. At home, the woodpile shrinks daily. Every log burned is a decision: use it now or save it for an even colder night ahead. Families learned to stretch supplies, banking fires carefully, cooking quickly, and adding layers of clothing instead of fuel. Often the hearth was lit only at mealtimes, and the rest of the day was spent enduring the chill. Comfort became a measured resource, and each ember mattered. Smoke was not always welcome. Damp wood hissed and spat, filling rooms with harsh fumes. Pine, heavy with resin, cracked and sent sparks across the floor. Oak burned slow and steady and was prized above all. You felt the difference with every piece. Some burned too fast, some smoked too much, some were ideal. Firewood developed its own language, each type telling a story of endurance. Still, the hard truth remained. Many people could not gather enough at all. Winter struck hardest at those who were too poor or too weak to haul branches. Neighbors sometimes shared, but scarcity also bred mistrust. A missing bundle could mean theft, an argument, even violence. Firewood, like bread, became a form of survival currency. As evening settles, you sit beside a small flame, watching it consume the last log. Your hands ache from splitting, your back from carrying, yet the pile continues to shrink. You know that tomorrow you will search the hedges again, hoping the Lord's reeve does not catch you too close to the forest. Winter drags on, and fuel is always limited. As the fire fades and shadows grow, it becomes clear that medieval warmth was never free. It had to be sought, stored, and protected. Every flame carried a price, and each log was a small triumph over shortage. Soon the woodpile holds only twigs, bits of bark, and a few stubborn lumps of dried dung. You rub your numb hands and glance toward the marsh beyond the village. Another fuel waits there, far from refined, but responsible for saving countless winters: peat and turf. Written records from Ireland, Scotland, and parts of northern Europe clearly show that people cut peat blocks from bogs, dried them, and stacked them like bricks for burning. Archaeologists still uncover the ridged scars left in peatlands, proof of centuries of harvesting. Peat did not flare like wood. It burned slowly, with thick smoke and a strong smell. But where wood was scarce or tightly controlled, peat meant survival pulled directly from the earth. Local accounts often mention how carefully families guarded their peat stacks. Blocks were cut in spring, laid out in long rows to dry, then stacked neatly against walls or fences. Losing a peat pile to theft or flooding could be as devastating as losing winter food. Some households even locked them away, guarding bog bricks like valuables. Scholars disagree on peat's effectiveness. Some argue it produced more smoke than warmth, filling homes with a heavy, oily haze that coated surfaces in black residue. Others claim that when properly dried, it gave steady, lasting heat, ideal for slow cooking and keeping fires overnight. The reality likely depended on preparation and weather, since damp conditions could leave blocks useless. You imagine yourself in the bog, boots sinking into soft ground, the scent of wet moss thick in the air. You swing a specialized spade, cutting clean rectangular blocks, each lifting free with a heavy squelch. Your back soon protests, but you continue, stacking the blocks along the bank to dry. The work is dirty, but every piece represents future warmth. Each row is a promise that your hearth will not go cold. At home, you place a block into the fire. It does not roar. Instead, a slow, smoky glow spreads outward. The smell is earthy, almost sweet, clinging to your clothes until the bog seems part of you. You cough at first, then allow a small smile. The heat is gentler than wood, but steadier. It will not heat the whole room, yet it will keep embers alive through the night, sparing you the fear of waking to a dead hearth. Neighbors eye your stack with interest, asking how much you cut this year and whether you might trade a few bricks for bread or wool. You hesitate, knowing your own supply must last, but still a few pieces are shared. Survival here is never purely individual. One night you help them, another night they help you. The fire smolders late into the darkness, peat glowing red like buried gems. Smoke stings your eyes, darkens the rafters, and scratches your throat, but you endure it. Outside, frost sharpens, snow deepens, and wind scours the land. Inside, your hearth still breathes, fed by the ground itself. You lie down on a straw pallet, pulling the blanket close. The room smells of smoke and bog, unpleasant, yet oddly reassuring. It is the scent of continuity, of fuel that lasts longer than wood. Peat, humble and messy, has turned your fragile home into a pocket of determined survival. When dawn arrives, pale and cold, embers still glow. You stir them gently, coaxing flame from peat's lingering core. You give thanks not to the forest forbidden by the Lord, but to the bog, which offered freely to those willing to cut and endure its mud. The smoky scent still clings to your clothes when another sound reaches you, distant, muffled, like carts groaning under weight. You follow it to the riverbank and see men streaked with soot unloading sacks and baskets. The smell strikes first, sharp and biting, unlike wood or peat. This is coal, the fuel that will one day reshape the world. In the Middle Ages, however, it remains a novelty, slowly entering everyday use. Records from Durham, Newcastle, and along English rivers show that by the 13th century, sea coal was already being transported by boat and cart to nearby towns. It burned hotter than wood and lasted longer, and merchants quickly recognized its value. Yet for most villages, it was still strange, dirty, and unpleasant. Some lords bought it for castles, especially near mines, but farther inland, many peasants had never seen a lump. There is one more telling detail. Early reactions to coal smoke were wary. Chroniclers describe Londoners complaining that it polluted the air, blackened buildings, and harmed the lungs. There are even records of noblewomen refusing to enter houses where coal fires burned, insisting the smoke damaged their clothing. Despite these objections, the fuel continued to spread because as forests declined and wood became more expensive, coal provided something crucial: reliability. It could be mined, transported, and piled in heaps that lasted far longer than stacks of logs. Historians still disagree on how common coal use truly was in the medieval era. Some maintain it remained mostly confined to mining areas and major towns where transport made sense. Others argue that by the late 14th century, coal was already altering urban life, fueling trades such as smithing and brewing as well as heating homes. The reality lies buried in uneven evidence: charred remains from excavations, city laws complaining about smoke, scattered household records. Even so, its gradual spread is hard to deny. You crouch beside a coal pile and lift a lump. It blackens your fingers at once, leaving dark stains. The surface feels coarse, brittle along the edges, like a stone imitating wood. You smell it, grimace slightly, and drop it into a brazier. At first it only smolders quietly. Then it suddenly ignites, producing a fierce, steady heat. The room warms faster than expected, though the smoke rises thick and sharp. You cough and wave it away, yet the strength of this small black rock is undeniable. Around you, opinions ripple through the room. One man vows never to burn it, claiming it sickens his family. Another boasts that his coal supply lasts longer than his neighbor's entire woodpile. Children stare wide-eyed as blue flames flicker against the lumps, a color they have never seen from logs. A woman scolds the mess, brushing soot from her apron, but she keeps feeding the fire. Arguments aside, the coal burns hot, and heat means survival. The smell is harsh, clinging to your hair and soaking into your cloak. You picture London a century later, its streets wrapped in smoke, chimneys pumping soot into every corner. Even now, kings and councils were issuing complaints and trying to limit its use. Still, demand kept rising. People endure much when warmth is at stake. Night settles and you sit by the brazier again. The coal glows red, steady and strong, while wind rattles the shutters outside. You rub your hands together, amazed at how much longer it lasts than wood or peat. You know it is dirtier and more severe, but you also sense that many winters from now, villages and cities alike will rely on this black stone more than any log. You are witnessing not just a fire, but a shift, a new phase in humanity's constant struggle against cold. As your eyelids grow heavy, you understand that warmth is never simple. Every fuel has its cost. Wood brings scarcity, peat brings smoke, coal brings soot. Yet all are accepted because winter never bargains. It only demands, and people respond with whatever will burn. The coal continues to smolder, but its acrid smoke makes you yearn for another kind of warmth, one scented with bread. You follow a faint aroma down a muddy lane until you reach the center of every community, the kitchen. Not only your own smoky hearth, but the larger spaces where food and fire met in ways that often made them the warmest places to be. Household accounts and medieval images clearly show that kitchens were built not just for cooking, but for gathering heat. Large ovens of clay or stone held domes that glowed after hours of burning wood. Once the flames faded, the stored warmth remained, ideal for baking bread, roasting meat, or drying wet clothing. In wealthy homes, kitchens were placed away from the main hall to reduce smoke and fire danger. Yet in winter, these rooms became prized shelters, alive with the scent of grain and simmering pots. Here is one of those surprising details. In many towns, communal ovens served entire neighborhoods. Families brought dough to the baker, who slid loaves into enormous ovens capable of baking dozens at once. People often lingered as they waited, pressing close to the glowing mouths just to feel the heat. Picture the chatter, children shifting restlessly, neighbors trading gossip, all while soaking in warmth that reached deep into their bones. The bread mattered, but the fire mattered more. Historians still debate whether these kitchens and bakehouses truly functioned as social centers or were merely practical stops. Some believe they became informal winter gathering places, drawing people for warmth and companionship. Others argue their role was mostly transactional, with little time for lingering in the cold. The evidence remains incomplete, pulled from scattered records and local rules about oven use. Yet when you step into one of these kitchens, the argument feels irrelevant. The wave of heat on your frozen skin is proof enough. The kitchen pulses with life. Sparks jump from the hearth where a cauldron hangs, its iron chain creaking with every stir. The oven glows like sunrise, its clay arch so hot you recoil if you lean too close. A servant draws out loaves, their crusts darkening at the edges, the smell filling the room. Another wipes sweat from his brow despite the frost outside. For him, winter barely exists here. The fire drives it away completely. You move closer, letting warmth seep into stiff fingers. Flour dust coats the floor, smoke thickens the air, but none of it matters as your body finally thaws. You watch a boy toss kindling into the hearth, his motions practiced, his cheeks flushed. He smiles, and you know he understands. This is the finest room in the house, perhaps in the whole village when snow blankets the fields. In poorer homes, the kitchen hearth was smaller, yet its purpose was unchanged. Families gathered there not only to eat, but to live. Meals simmered for hours, partly for efficiency, partly because a bubbling pot ensured the fire stayed alive. Even vegetable scraps or bones served as fuel, offering warmth as much as nourishment. The smell of cooking signaled more than hunger. It promised that the fire had lasted another day. Still, kitchens were not without danger. Sparks landed on straw floors. Grease fires erupted. Smoke stung eyes until tears flowed. Medieval town laws often warned about fire hazards in bakeries, threatening fines if ovens were left unattended. Entire streets sometimes burned because a single kitchen spark escaped into the night. Yet people accepted the risk, because without fire there was no warmth, no bread, no life. You lean back against the kitchen wall, feeling the stone warmed beneath your shoulders. The room hums with work, knives chopping, cauldrons bubbling, voices calling over the crackle of flames. Outside, frost still rules, but inside, the balance changes. For a short while, this small chamber becomes its own world, defined by heat instead of cold, by sustenance instead of silence. As you close your eyes and breathe in with smoke and fresh bread, you realize kitchens were more than tools. They were refuges, glowing pockets of life where comfort and community met. If the hall displayed wealth and the chamber offered privacy, the kitchen represented survival. Fire turned into food, warmth turned into fellowship. The kitchen's warmth clings to your clothes, but once outside, the wind bites again, sharper for the contrast. You shiver, pull your cloak tight, and follow another ribbon of smoke, not from homes this time, but from places where labor itself produced heat. In the center of town, you find the bakeries and breweries. Their chimneys released clouds of steam, doors creaking as villagers slipped inside to chase warmth alongside bread and ale. City records and guild documents confirm that bakeries and breweries were not merely centers of trade, they often served as unintended shelters in winter. Bakery ovens ran continuously, especially in larger towns where communal loaves fed hundreds. Breweries, likewise, boiled mash and wort in massive vats, sending warm, yeasty air spilling into the streets. For many villagers, lingering near these doors was an unspoken privilege, a way to warm hands and faces without asking permission. A curious scene appears in a few chronicles. Apprentices and children pressed their backs against the outer walls of bakeries, soaking up heat that radiated through the stone. Imagine villagers lined like sunbathing lizards against warmed rock, laughing at their own cleverness while the rest of the street froze. It wasn't graceful, it was survival by proximity. Historians still debate how accessible these spaces really were. Some argue that bakeries strictly monitored their ovens, wary of fire risks and outsiders. Others suggest that in crowded towns, neighbors, beggars, and children naturally gathered at the doors. The truth likely falls somewhere in between, tolerated until disruptive, discouraged when fuel ran high. But standing here now, breathing the yeasty air, scholarly debates feel irrelevant. Warmth is warmth, wherever it escapes. You push open the bakery door, greeted by a wave of heat. The oven glows white-orange, its mouth a cave of fire, while bakers slide loaves in and out with long paddles. The air is thick with flour dust and smoke, yet your shoulders unclench, fingers thaw, toes stop aching. The scent of baking bread seeps deep, intoxicating in its promise. Nearby, women gossip over dough. Children chase each other among benches, a stray dog curls beneath a table, too content to be shooed away. This place is more than a workplace, It is a magnet. People are drawn to its fire, not only for food but for relief. A short walk away, the brewery offers similar comfort. Steam rises from massive cauldrons of simmering barley, the air rich with sweet, earthy fragrance. Workers stir with long poles, sweat on brows despite frost-coated windows. You step inside, warmth enveloping you like a thick blanket. The bubbling, hissing steam, the clatter of mugs, it all blends into a symphony of comfort. Of course, dangers existed. Fires burned constantly, fuel was consumed rapidly, and boiling liquids were hazardous. Some towns recorded breweries as fire risks, requiring inspections or taxes. Yet, none of that stopped people from stepping into the steamy air, breathing deeply as if warmth itself could be swallowed. You linger, observing the brewers sip from a mug, cheeks flushed. Workers laugh despite the labor, bodies too warmed to notice winter at the door. For a moment, you feel envy, what it must be like to live amidst this heat, even with sweat and risk. When you leave, your clothes carry the smells of bread and beer, mingling with smoke. Outside, the frost awaits, but you feel fortified, as if a portion of the bakery's fire and brewery's steam now travels with you. These industries weren't meant to serve as refuges, yet they did, becoming hearths for entire communities. Walking home, the cold returns, but you realize that warmth often came not from private fires but from shared labor. To hover near ovens and vats was to borrow the heat of work itself, letting survival slip in alongside daily bread and ale. The smell of yeast and smoke clings as night falls. You retreat from the street into a small chamber lit by a single lamp. There, resting on a table, lies another invention for holding warmth, a hand warmer, the intimate cousin of a brazier. Archaeological finds and household records reveal that portable hand warmers, small metal containers with glowing coals, were carried by the wealthy in winter. Crafted from brass, bronze, or iron, they often had pierced lids to release heat steadily. Some were simple, others ornate, casting faint patterns of light when glowing. They could be tucked into sleeves, cloaks, or carried like lanterns through bitter streets. A curious variation existed in Italy and Spain. Hollowed spheres, almost like oversized apples, cradled discreetly in palms. Women used them in church, hiding the glow beneath shawls while kneeling on icy floors. Imagine a congregation murmuring prayers while secret embers kept their fingers from stiffening. Historians debate accessibility. Some claim these warmers were rare luxuries for nobles, merchants, and clergy. Others suggest simpler versions, clay pots or iron cups, were common in towns, especially in harsh winters. Likely, the truth was a spectrum, ornate warmers in aristocratic halls, humbler versions quietly glowing in villages. You lift one now, its warmth radiates through your palms, steady and comforting, not scorching, like holding a small companion. You tuck it into your sleeve, the heat creeps up your arm, easing joints stiff from cold. It is not a roaring hearth, but a private ember against the world's indifference. Metallic smoke fills the air faintly. You hear the occasional pop of shifting coals, a reminder that even small comforts carry risk. Children eye it, tempted, yet warned of burns. Stories recall servants accidentally igniting straw or cloth, turning aid into disaster. Every ember in the Middle Ages carried both safety and danger. Still, its usefulness is undeniable. Stepping outside with the warmer tucked close, the bite of wind is softened. Your cloak flaps, cheeks sting, but hands remain alive, blood flowing instead of freezing. You can walk further, work longer, endure more than bare hands allow. In winter markets, merchants huddle over warmers, stirring embers. A scribe warms fingers before returning to parchment. A woman selling wool caps leans over hers, muttering as crowds press by. Each warmer is personal, private, a portable half of warmth carried into the coldest corners of daily life. Finally, returning home, you place it beside your pallet. Its glow fades slowly as you drift to sleep. It does not heat the room, but it makes life bearable. This is the reality of medieval warmth. Modest victories scattered like embers, enough to stave off frost for another hour. The hand warmer dies to ash. You stretch stiff shoulders, aware that even with clever tools, the cold persists. The body itself remains the last fortress. You pull your cloak tighter, noticing how every villager, monk, and noble faces the winter in layers. Warmth comes not just from walls or fires, but from clothing that acts as armor. Historical records and surviving textiles show that wool was central to medieval winter dress. Peasants wrapped themselves in coarse, undyed wool, while the wealthy wore finer fabrics, often dyed with costly pigments. Wool retained heat even when damp, a blessing in a season where snow clung to shoulders and sleet-soaked hems. Beneath these layers, people wore linen shirts and shifts, smooth against the skin, layered thickly when the cold grew harsh. In colder regions, garments were sometimes padded with raw fleece or fabric scraps, creating early forms of insulation. Some outfits became so bulky they restricted movement, yet when frostbitten winds blew, practicality outweighed grace. Children, in particular, were bundled to near absurdity, their eyes the only visible part of their cocooned forms. There is debate about fur in everyday life. Some scholars argue that luxurious furs like sable or fox were mostly for nobles, symbols of status. Others note that villagers could use humble furs, sheep, rabbit, or goat, to line boots and cloaks, even if less elegant. Regardless, fur, whether lavish or simple, was essential for keeping the cold at bay. You tug on a rough wool cloak, the hood shading your face against biting wind. Beneath, a linen tunic brushes your skin, and makeshift socks wrap your feet before you slide into stiff leather shoes. Layers make movement awkward, but each one adds another shield against winter's chill. In noble halls, winter wear is more elaborate. Ladies sweep past in fur-lined gowns with trailing sleeves, while men wear padded doublets under embroidered coats. The garments are not just striking, they are practical. Thick fur collars protect throats, and long wool cloaks trap heat across the chest. Even fashion is shaped by survival, though wealth allows style to blend with necessity. The faint earthy scent of lanolin clings to you, the natural odor of wool never fully washed of grease. Snow dampens your cloak, yet it continues to hold warmth. Others shake out their garments, grumbling at the weight but silently grateful, for without these layers, they would already be frozen. Children dart through streets, cloaks flapping, mittens patched, boots wrapped in cloth. They don't complain, they have known no other winter. Gathering near a brazier, their cloaks steam as frost melts away, filling the air with the scent of wet wool. Returning home, you hang your cloak near the fire, watching it smoke lightly as it dries. Survival here relies not only on fire or food but on fabric, the layers wrapped around the body, the animal skins and woven cloth that serve as shields. Every tunic, fur lining, and cloth-wrapped boot is a line of defense against winter. No hearth or brazier could replace them. Even dressed in layers, you sense how the season controls daily life. Medieval winter was not just a chill, it shaped the rhythm of existence. Work slowed as frozen fields made plowing impossible, leaving only livestock needing care. Short days led to long nights, with households rising late and retreating early, guided by firelight. Life itself moved slower, as if people hibernated in human form. Yet winter also allowed indoor crafts and community. Women spun wool or flax by the hearth. Men mended tools. Children twisted rushes into lights. Storytelling thrived during long nights, with songs and riddles filling smoky halls. Paradoxically, the season enriched culture, teaching skills and traditions that outlasted darkness. Scholars debate whether medieval winters were harsher or simply different. Reduced labor may have conserved energy, but food and fuel shortages made the cold punishing. Reality varied. Some households feasted and rested, while others shivered through scarcity. At your hearth in late afternoon, the sky dim, supper bubbles in a single pot. Families eat early, not only because darkness falls quickly but because there is little else to do. Evenings stretch long. You wrap a blanket, listening to hushed tales, neighbors sharing news, children reciting rhymes, and tunes older than memory. Festivals break winter's monotony, fires burning bright, meat roasting, warmth spreading into hearts as well as bones. Sleep itself is shaped by the season. Many go to bed after dark, waking for a first sleep, then lying awake or chatting before a second sleep until dawn. You imagine tending the hearth in the night, whispering to a companion, then returning to covers, the air thick with wool and smoke. Winter is endured, but also patterned. Its demands embedded in work, rest, food, and prayer. Outside, wind howls and livestock shift in the shed. Inside, wrapped in the rhythm of winter, a strange contentment emerges. Life slows and narrows, yet in this constraint lies focus. Survival is deliberate, every act measured, every ember watched. Medieval winters were not merely months of suffering, they were months of adaptation, of finding meaning in slowness, of shaping community against frost. Sometimes, the season surprises. Stepping outside one morning, you find wonder instead of misery. A river frozen solid, its glassy surface stretching wide beneath a pale sky. Word spreads quickly, and by afternoon, merchants, children, and travelers tread boldly across the ice, embracing winter's marvel. A frost fair begins, a rare celebration when winter itself becomes the stage. Chroniclers in England described these events vividly during the late Middle Ages, especially along the River Thames, when extended cold spells froze its waters. Stalls appeared almost overnight, built from timber and cloth, offering food, drink, and small goods. Bonfires burned on the ice, smoke curling into the crisp air, as people laughed at the absurdity of standing atop what should have been water. For a season usually marked by scarcity, these fairs offered bursts of abundance and delight. One detail almost feels comic. Vendors sometimes roasted meat or brewed ale right on the ice. Imagine the courage required to set fire atop frozen water, trusting the ice beneath. Reports described the surface trembling with cracks. Yet revelry continued, with people choosing enjoyment over fear. Children skated awkwardly on bones strapped to their shoes. Dogs bounded freely, and jugglers performed while bundled in wool against the biting cold. Not all historians agree on how widespread or frequent these festivals were. Some argue they were rare, limited to the harshest winters of the so-called Little Ice Age. Others suggest smaller, local versions occurred more often than we realize, their traces lost because they were informal and temporary. The debate continues in fragmentary accounts, but whether rare or common, frost fairs capture something essential, the human refusal to let winter dominate entirely. Stepping onto the ice now, the surface creaks faintly beneath your feet. Laughter and shouts fill the air, mingling with the smell of roasted chestnuts and smoke. A fiddler plays while couples dance carefully, cloaks spinning as their breath clouds the air. For a moment, no one worries about the cold. It becomes part of the spectacle, a shared joke between villagers and season. Children rush past, cheeks flushed, holding sticks tipped with ribbons. Merchants call out, selling gingerbread shaped like animals. Somewhere, a man slides mugs of ale across a table, froth threatening to freeze. Dogs bark, geese honk at their frozen pond, and everyone clusters around bonfires, marveling that flames can exist atop ice. The joy is contagious. You find yourself grinning despite stiff fingers and numb toes. For a few hours, winter feels less like an enemy and more like a partner in a grand game. Even the danger of cracking ice adds to the thrill. People cheer when a loud snap echoes across the river, laughing nervously but refusing to retreat. As twilight falls, the fair grows magical. Torches flicker, reflecting on the ice. The air hums with song, mugs clink, and shadows dance across makeshift stalls. You breathe deeply, the cold fills your lungs, yet exhilaration replaces dread. Winter has given a gift, an unexpected festival carved from frost. When you finally leave, trudging back to your smoky cottage, your body is tired, but your spirit light. You know the cold will return tomorrow, along with hunger and smoke, yet tonight you carry the memory of laughter on ice. In the long struggle with winter, moments like these are fleeting, fragile victories, but unforgettable. The memory of laughter fades as night deepens. By the embers, the world quiet outside, you realize warmth was never purely physical. People relied on stories, charms, and whispered protections, believing unseen forces could shield them from the cold's bite. Winter was not just an enemy of the body, it was a test of spirit. Parish records and folklore reveal that protective charms were woven into daily life. Families muttered prayers over the hearth, invoking saints like Saint Blaise, Saint Lawrence, or Saint Bridget to keep the flames alive. Straw crosses were hung on doors in parts of Ireland, thought to guard against frost. These practices reassured the soul more than they changed the weather. Some believed throwing a pinch of salt into the fire could chase away evil spirits, and the cold itself. In German villages, ale was offered to the hearth to maintain warmth. Imagine crouching by the fire, tossing a crumb of bread or a splash of drink, bargaining with unseen forces to survive another night. Scholars debate whether these acts were symbolic or sincere. Some say they were routine habits layered with meaning. Others insist people genuinely feared supernatural winter spirits, witches who stole hearthfire, or demons riding the north wind. Folklore blurs faith and practice. You watch a villager whisper over the hearth, tracing patterns in the air. Children clutch each other, wide-eyed, as sparks leap. The charm is spoken softly, because magic is more potent as a secret. For a moment, everyone feels the fire has grown stronger, the room a little warmer. You feel it too, though reason knows it's the cold finally settling. Legends swirl in taverns and along winter roads. Travelers saved from snowstorms by saints bearing eternal flame, witches blowing frost through keyholes, frost sprites tapping at shutters with icicle nails. These stories entertain, but they also reveal a truth. When survival is fragile, imagination becomes a tool. A neighbor recounts a tale of a miraculous fire guarded by a kindly spirit in a marsh. Everyone nods solemnly, as if the story itself carries warmth. Belief feels like insulation, wrapping the heart stronger than wool. Night deepens, wind clawing at shutters, yet inside, the room is spellbound. A child yawns, curling against her mother, soot smudging her cheek. Someone stirs the fire, sparks leap like stars. No one speaks, yet all are grateful for the lingering charm, whether salt, prayer, or storytelling. You close your eyes, hearing blessings echo faintly. Medieval warmth was never only logs and embers. It was faith, magic, hope, tools to stand against the frost. Morning brings new sounds, sniffles and coughs. Winter did more than freeze bodies, it unsettled minds. Medieval physicians warned that cold air could disrupt the body's balance. Influenced by Galenic theory, medical treatises stressed that the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, could fall into chaos from chill. Cold and damp encouraged phlegm to dominate, causing coughs, fevers, and melancholy. The body, like the hearth, was a furnace. If the internal flame weakened, imbalance followed. And from this belief arose peculiar practices. People sometimes carried small sachets of herbs, sage, rosemary, lavender, pressed to their noses, hoping the warm, dry aromas would counteract the dangers of cold, damp air. In Italy, doctors recommended chewing cloves or nutmeg, tiny sparks of internal heat intended to balance the body's humors. Picture shivering in the wind while biting a sharp clove, believing it could ward off both frost and illness. Scholars still debate whether these practices were grounded more in medical theory or custom. Some suggest physicians genuinely believed cold air caused imbalance, while others think the remedies were largely symbolic, offering psychological comfort. The absence of detailed records leaves the question open, though the continued use of these remedies shows how much people trusted them. You sit by the hearth, listening to a neighbor describe his cough. He swears it began after walking in the night wind without a cloak, and everyone nods in agreement. Another tells of a child who caught frost in her chest, and soon remedies are shared freely, garlic boiled in milk, spiced wine, or simply wrapping oneself in blankets near the fire. The cures rely as much on warmth as on medicine. The scent of cloves and cinnamon fills the air as someone prepares a remedy. You sip the spiced wine, feeling the heat spread from your mouth into your chest. It seems to drive the cold away, replaced by the fire of the spices. Whether it is medicine or comfort, it works, for now. At monasteries, infirmaries echo with similar practices. Monks cough in their cells, rosemary smolders in bowls, and physicians lecture on the dangers of north winds, which bring both chill and illness. Herbal remedies are measured carefully, Yet beneath the ritual lies the same principle you feel at home. Heat is health, cold is threat. The fear of melancholy also surfaces. People whisper that the long winter darkness brings a sadness deeper than mood. It is a humor imbalance, a body flooded with black bile. To sit too long by a dying fire is to invite melancholy. You realize that even the spirit was considered vulnerable in winter, as fragile as the breath itself. You watch a woman toss herbs into the fire, breathing in the fragrant smoke, convinced it will protect her family. Children imitate her, giggling as they hold sprigs to their noses. The ritual ties them together, belief as much as medicine, warmth from both fire and faith. As night falls, you lie beneath blankets, chest still warmed by spiced wine. You understand that warmth in this world is more than firewood or coal. It is also the conviction that internal heat, from food, drink, or spirit, shields against winter's dangers. In a time when science and superstition intertwined, the line between health and warmth was blurred, and perhaps that blending was itself a form of healing. The glow from the spiced wine lingers, and your gaze sweeps across the room. Warmth wasn't only fire or clothing, it was built into medieval homes themselves. Archaeology shows that builders knew the cold intimately. Walls were thick with stone or earth, ceilings low to trap heat, and doorways small to reduce drafts. Houses were sometimes clustered closely, roofs angled to shield neighbors like a huddle against frost. What seems cramped to us was, in fact, survival strategy. Every timber, joint, and curve was deliberate. Some cottages had smoke hoods or simple canopies above open hearths, funneling smoke upward without full chimneys. These devices were crude, yet effective, capturing most smoke while leaving air below tolerable. You can imagine crouching beneath a rough canopy while flames snap beneath it, smoke guided just enough to keep eyes from burning. Scholars debate how effective these designs were. Stone walls could store heat or cold. Low ceilings and fabric hangings offered some insulation. Likely, survival depended on careful tending of the fire. The same walls that radiated warmth by day could steal it overnight. You step into a cottage, ducking under the low doorway. The room feels snug, compressed, as though the walls themselves embrace those inside. Rough walls muffle some wind. The hearth, set in the central floor, directs smoke into the rafters while leaving enough air below to breathe. Every detail speaks of compromise. Nothing perfect, everything functional. Larger homes reveal similar tensions. Stone castles appeared invincible, yet trapped cold like caverns. Lords adapted, smaller chambers lined with tapestries, narrow windows, kitchens placed near halls to share heat. Spiral staircases carried warmth upward through frigid towers. These strategies didn't eliminate cold, they managed it. Smells reveal another layer: damp stone, smoky wooden beams, rush mats faintly scented with herbs, soot lingering on ceilings. Warmth was not only felt but smelled, a signature of homes that had endured winters. Villages themselves were arranged for endurance. Houses pressed together, barns close, narrow lanes blocking wind, brush fences catching snow. Architecture was choreography, designed to resist frost. Not every design succeeded. Roofs leaked, shutters rattled, smoke hoods failed, and cold seeped through cracks. Fire hazards were constant, yet people kept building, repairing, and adapting. Survival was not perfection, it was persistence. At night, under low rafters, the room feels different from a noble hall. The ceiling holds in what little heat the hearth provides. Wool drying, stew simmering, smoke lingering. The space is modest but safe. Outside, faint hammering repairs a shutter. Another household patches a wall crack with fresh dung, the earthy scent accepted as the price of warmth. Here, architecture is not about beauty, it is about enduring winter. It is survival crafted in timber, clay, stone, and smoke. Every home served as a handmade shield against the season. As you close your eyes beneath dark wooden beams, you realize that warmth did not come only from fires or fabrics. It was embedded in the very design of these spaces. The quiet cleverness of builders shaped walls and ceilings into defenses against winter. Imperfect, smoky, fragile, but sufficient. Always just enough. The thick walls of a cottage fade from memory as a new image takes their place. A castle rises, its towers cutting into the gray sky. From afar, it appears invincible, a fortress against every threat. Yet step inside during the depths of January, and that impression falters. Stone does not repel the cold, it amplifies it. Even lords, with all their wealth, could not escape winter's sting. Surviving architectural details and castle inventories tell the same story. Though fires roared in grand halls, most chambers remained bitterly cold. Thick walls, sometimes 10 feet wide, retained chill as much as heat, while narrow arrow slits let icy drafts creep inside. Lords and ladies layered themselves in fur and wool, draping cloaks indoors. Servants scurried endlessly with bundles of wood, feeding fireplaces that burned more for show than efficiency. An unusual detail survives. Castle latrines, known as garderobes, often doubled as storage for clothes. Clothes stored their absorbed cold drafts, which supposedly kept moths from chewing fabric. Picture stepping into a stone shaft one winter morning, shivering while changing, thinking at least the moths are gone. Even in grandeur, compromises were constant. Historians debate how much comfort castles truly offered. Some argue that with multiple hearths, heavy draperies, and carefully arranged chambers, nobles were warmer than peasants. Others note that even kings complained of drafts, and tapestries or braziers offered little relief. Likely, the truth is in between. Lords had more defenses against cold, yet never fully conquered it. You enter the great hall. A fire blazes in a massive fireplace, its carved mantle blackened by years of smoke. Sparks leap, flames roar. Step away, and the heat vanishes. Frost rims the far wall, stones slick with condensation. Servants huddle near the fire, pretending to polish goblets while secretly warming their hands. Upstairs, rooms grow colder. A noblewoman sits near a small brazier, her gown lined with fur, hands tucked into a muff. She laughs with her ladies, but her flushed cheeks reflect chill, not comfort. Rich tapestries depicting knights and saints hang behind her, decorating and insulating against relentless cold. The scent of burning wood follows every step. Oak and beech, hauled by wagon loads, feed the endless hunger of fireplaces. Servants grumble over chopping and hauling, knowing even a lord's forest might dwindle during harsh winter. In some cases, entire villages supplied castles with fuel, shrinking their own fires while the fortress blazed. Night falls. Torches sputter along corridors, flames bending in drafts. You clutch your cloak as footsteps echo against walls that feel more tomb-like than home. A child cries in a distant chamber, a nurse muttering comfort while tucking another blanket around the little one. Power cannot banish winter. It only buys extra layers, logs, and servants to feed the flames. Yet there is a strange grandeur in this endurance. Castles stood not only against invaders, but as monuments to human persistence. Stones loomed through frost, housing people who endured by layering fabrics, hanging tapestries, feeding braziers, and believing strength resided in walls. Even with numb toes and visible breath, they trusted the fortress as proof of survival. You sit in a small chamber, a single candle flickering, pulling your cloak closer. The fire in the great hall is distant. The brazier here has gone cold. Stone presses in on all sides, indifferent. Still you smile. If even lords and kings shivered through the night, there is comfort in shared hardship. Winter humbled everyone, regardless of rank. You lie down on a stiff mattress, breath misting, walls groaning under frost. The castle towers over rivers and fields, yet inside, you feel no different from the peasant in a dung-plastered cottage. Power bends to winter, pride freezes, and every ember matters. The castle's chill lingers in your bones. As dawn rises, something else reaches you, voices, warm and close, laughing despite frost. Step into nearby cottages, and the reason becomes clear. During the harshest nights, when firewood dwindled and embers dimmed, neighbors relied not only on their hearths but on one another. Records and oral histories show that survival was rarely solitary. Families shared fuel, borrowed embers, sometimes split meals. A hearth was not merely property, it was woven into community life. People survived less because of walls and more because of shared warmth, literal and figurative. A small custom survives in scattered accounts. When a household's fire died, a child fetched a live coal from a neighbor in a pot or clay jar. This was expected, not shameful. A flame passed from one hearth to another was a lifeline, a thread connecting homes. Imagine trudging through snow, pot wrapped in wool, guarding a single glowing ember like treasure. Scholars debate how far this solidarity reached. Some suggest villages everywhere shared fuel and stories for survival. Others cite theft, quarrels, and suspicion when wood piles vanished. Both were true. Winter inspired generosity one night, suspicion the next. Survival was never entirely noble. Neighbors gather around a brazier in a cottage. A woman pours thin ale into mugs. Steam rises as children press close to the glow. Smoke, chatter, and damp will scent fill the air. Jokes fly, complaints are shared, and someone recalls a year when snow crushed roofs. Laughter seems warmer than fire itself. Comfort comes from fellowship as much as flame. In poorer villages, solidarity could be more dramatic. Entire families might sleep together in a single cottage during harsh spells, sharing blankets, livestock, and fuel. The space became crowded, but bodies pressed together meant the difference between shivering and freezing. To survive winter meant surrendering privacy, accepting that staying alive required closeness. Picture yourself leaning in as an elder tells a folktale, their voice rasping like fire crackling. Children gasp and giggle at the story's turns, while adults nod at its lessons. The tale passes from one ear to another, like an ember carried in the dark. By the end, you are not only warmer, you are steadier, more certain of survival. Yet winter also brought tension. When food ran low and fuel dwindled, neighbors watched each other closely. A missing log could spark suspicion. A misplaced brick might trigger an argument. The same closeness that created solidarity could breed resentment. Winter tested bodies and the bonds between people alike. Still, more often than not, laughter outweighed quarrels. Shared hardship, breathing the same smoke-filled air, coughing through stiff joints, made the burden lighter. Misery shared was misery halved. As evenings stretched, someone sang a lullaby, more than a song, its notes curling toward the rafters. Conversation faded, mugs emptied, blankets pulled tighter. The fire sank low, yet hearts remained a little warmer for the time spent together. Walking home through the snow, your breath misting in the dark, you carried more than heat. You carried the certainty that medieval winter survival was communal, a patchwork quilt sewn from small acts of kindness, an ember given, a story shared, a place at the fire offered. By the time you lay in your straw bed, the lesson lingered. Winter pressed hard, but human warmth, messy, noisy, generous, pushed back, and that, more than wood or peat, kept frost at bay. The echoes of neighborly laughter fade as you approach the parish church. Its tower looms against the pale sky, bells silent, doors closed against the wind. Yet as you push them open, you feel something unusual, not warmth exactly, but a gentler cold. Stone built like a castle, it should be icy, yet the air feels tempered, softened by centuries of ritual and human presence. Church records and surveys confirm that most medieval churches lacked modern heating. Fires were forbidden in sanctuaries, leaving vast stone naves cold. Worshippers shivered through long masses, cloaks wrapped tight, breath fogging the air. Still, churches had subtle ways of easing winter. Thick walls trapped not only sound but the faint warmth of crowded bodies. Small side chapels or vestries sometimes sheltered discreet braziers. Parishioners often brought small hand warmers or hot stones wrapped in cloth, hiding them under cloaks during prayers. Wealthier members might hire a servant to hold a brazier nearby, shielding them from drafts. Imagine rows of villagers kneeling on stone floors, secretly clutching warm stones, faith intertwined with practicality. Historians debate whether cathedrals were simply endured as icy monuments or if creative heating was used. Some evidence suggests that during major feasts, torches and candle piles combined to slightly raise temperatures. Others argue no amount of wax could warm such vast spaces. Standing here, you sense both views hold truth. Enough light to sparkle, not enough to thaw your feet. You shuffle to a side chapel where a brazier glows faintly. Incense mixes with charcoal smoke, creating a haze both sacred and earthly. A monk tends the coals, adding resin chips that pop and release fragrant smoke. You extend your hands, feeling the warmth brush your fingers. Around you, worshippers murmur prayers, their soft voices weaving rhythm that distracts from the cold. The architecture itself deceives the senses. Sunlight through stained glass splashes color across stone floors, tricking the eye into feeling warmth even as the air remains sharp. Villagers huddle in pews, cloaks overlapping, children nestled against parents, sharing body heat. The priest intones, and the stiff organ pipes wheeze faintly, music rising like breath, filling the nave. Even in bitter cold, ritual provides insulation, repetition, community, belief. For an hour, drafts and cold stone fade. Festivals made churches warmer, not by fire but by numbers. On Christmas Eve or Candlemas, hundreds crowded shoulder to shoulder. The air grew thick with sweat, wool, and incense. It was far from comfortable, but survivable, and in that closeness, a strange joy emerged. The church became more than a place of worship, it softened winter's bite. Outside, bells toll in crisp air. Pulling your cloak tight, you step into snow, yet something lingers. The church did not truly warm you, but steadied you. Its walls offered shelter from the wind, its rituals added meaning to cold days, and its community made frost less lonely. Countless villagers had trudged here over the centuries, boots crunching snow, drawn by faith and the promise of togetherness. The fire may not have blazed, but the spirit did, and that was its own form of warmth. At home by your hearth, you remember candle glow, murmured prayers, the faint touch of warmth in a side chapel. Survival wasn't measured solely in logs and embers. Sometimes it was measured in voices lifted together, in colored light, in the stubborn faith that cold could not conquer the soul. The memory of stained glass and incense lingers as you step into the deep winter night. Stars glint overhead, cold and merciless, and snow crunches underfoot. Across villages, towns, monasteries, and castles, people battled the same enemy in countless ways. Survival was always a patchwork quilt of fire, fabric, faith, and fellowship. Chronicles and archaeology confirm that no single method sufficed. Hearths smoked but gave light, braziers warmed but risked suffocation, tapestries softened stone but never banished drafts, coal burned hot but fouled the air, peat smoldered steadily but left homes choking. Every choice carried trade-offs, and people balanced them daily. Smoke for warmth, risk for comfort, scarcity for endurance. Folklore and diaries describe winter as a living being, a wolf pressing at the door, a giant crouching on the roof. Fire became a loyal guardian, an ember-fed sentry holding the beast at bay. Banking coals each night was arming that guardian, giving it strength to fight until dawn. Imagine leaning over your hearth, whispering encouragement to the flames, as though they could obey. Scholars debate the harshness of medieval winters. Some argue climate shifts, like the Little Ice Age, made the 15th and 16th centuries particularly severe. Others insist endurance was always relative. A peasant in the 11th century shivered just as fiercely as one in the 14th. Regardless of recorded temperatures, the debate may never be settled, yet one truth remains. Cold was constant, and survival demanded relentless ingenuity. You sit now by the hearth one last time, hands reaching toward its warmth. Around you, memories of the past weeks assemble. The peasant cottage patched with dung, smoke stinging your eyes. The noble hall alive with spectacle, yet leaving backs icy. The monastery cloister, silent and harsh, where cold itself became prayer. The bathhouse steaming with relief, laughter drifting through mist. The frost fair on the frozen river. Children skating over ice as brittle as bone. Fires burning miraculously atop the ice. A neighbor's gift of embers carried carefully in a pot across deep snow. A whispered charm over the flames. The scent of herbs pressed to the nose. Spiced wine warming the chest. Each moment alone is fragile. Together, they form a tapestry of survival. This is the story of humans meeting the deepest cold, not with comfort, but with courage. You recall the countless unnamed men, women, and children enduring drafty nights, rising stiff and coughing, yet still cutting wood, fetching peat, or tending animals. Their breath curls in the frosty air, cloaks stiff with snow, laughter ringing through smoky rooms. They did not conquer winter, but they endured it, and in that endurance lay their triumph. The room grows quieter as the fire wanes. You lie back on straw, the heavy weight of wool pressing against your shoulders, smoke curling into your hair. Your body is weary, but your heart remains steady. For now, the ember still glows, a faint red pulse reminding you that even in the harshest season, warmth can be coaxed into life. You close your eyes, letting the world narrow to the crackle of ash, the murmur of distant wind, and the rhythm of your own breath. Medieval winters were brutal, unyielding, yet they shaped resilience, creativity, and stubborn resolve. Every ember, every story, every shared blanket proved that people could carve life against the coldest odds. And so you drift into sleep, surrounded by centuries of survival, carried on tides of smoke and shadow. Winter waits outside, yet here, why imagine trudging through snow, pot wrapped in wool, guarding a single glowing ember like treasure. Scholars debate how far this solidarity reached. Some suggest villages everywhere shared fuel and stories for survival. Others cite theft, quarrels, and suspicion when wood piles vanished. Both were true. Winter inspired generosity one night, suspicion the next. Survival was never entirely noble. Neighbors gather around a brazier in a cottage. A woman pours thin ale into mugs. Steam rises as children press close to the glow. Smoke, chatter, and damp will scent fill the air. Jokes fly, complaints are shared, and someone recalls a year when snow crushed roofs. Laughter seems warmer than fire itself. Comfort comes from fellowship as much as flame. In poorer villages, solidarity could be more dramatic. Entire families might sleep together in a single cottage during harsh spells, sharing blankets, livestock, and fuel. The space became crowded, but bodies pressed together meant the difference between shivering and freezing. To survive winter meant surrendering privacy, accepting that staying alive required closeness. Picture yourself leaning in as an elder tells a folk tale, their voice rasping like fire crackling. Children gasp and giggle at the story's turns, while adults nod at its lessons. The tale passes from one ear to another, like an ember carried in the dark. By the end, you are not only warmer, you are steadier, more certain of survival. Yet winter also brought tension. When food ran low and fuel dwindled, neighbors watched each other closely. A missing log could spark suspicion. A misplaced brick might trigger an argument. The same closeness that created solidarity could breed resentment. Winter tested bodies and the bonds between people alike. Still, more often than not, laughter outweighed quarrels. Shared hardship, breathing the same smoke-filled air, coughing through stiff joints, made the burden lighter. Misery shared was misery halved. As evenings stretched, someone sang a lullaby, more than a song, its notes curling toward the rafters. Conversation faded, mugs emptied, blankets pulled tighter. The fire sank low, yet hearts remained a little warmer for the time spent together. Walking home through the snow, your breath misting in the dark, you carried more than heat. You carried the certainty that medieval winter survival was communal, a patchwork quilt sewn from small acts of kindness, an ember given, a story shared, a place at the fire offered. By the time you lay in your straw bed, the lesson lingered. Winter pressed hard, but human warmth, messy, noisy, generous, pushed back, and that, more than wood or peat, kept frost at bay. The echoes of neighborly laughter fade as you approach the parish church. Its tower looms against the pale sky, bells silent, doors closed against the wind. Yet as you push them open, you feel something unusual, not warmth exactly, but a gentler cold. Stone built like a castle, it should be icy, yet the air feels tempered, softened by centuries of ritual and human presence. Church records and surveys confirm that most medieval churches lacked modern heating. Fires were forbidden in sanctuaries, leaving vast stone naves cold. Worshippers shivered through long masses, cloaks wrapped tight, breath fogging the air. Still, churches had subtle ways of easing winter. Thick walls trapped not only sound but the faint warmth of crowded bodies. Small side chapels or vestries sometimes sheltered discreet braziers. Parishioners often brought small hand warmers or hot stones wrapped in cloth, hiding them under cloaks during prayers. Wealthier members might hire a servant to hold a brazier nearby, shielding them from drafts. Imagine rows of villagers kneeling on stone floors, secretly clutching warm stones, faith intertwined with practicality. Historians debate whether cathedrals were simply endured as icy monuments or if creative heating was used. Some evidence suggests that during major feasts, torches and candle piles combined to slightly raise temperatures. Others argue no amount of wax could warm such vast spaces. Standing here, you sense both views hold truth. Enough light to sparkle, not enough to thaw your feet. You shuffle to a side chapel where a brazier glows faintly. Incense mixes with charcoal smoke, creating a haze both sacred and earthly. A monk tends the coals, adding resin chips that pop and release fragrant smoke. You extend your hands, feeling the warmth brush your fingers. Around you, worshippers murmur prayers, their soft voices weaving rhythm that distracts from the cold. The architecture itself deceives the senses. Sunlight through stained glass splashes color across stone floors, tricking the eye into feeling warmth even as the air remains sharp. Villagers huddle in pews, cloaks overlapping, children nestled against parents, sharing body heat. The priest intones, and the stiff organ pipes wheeze faintly, music rising like breath, filling the nave. Even in bitter cold, ritual provides insulation, repetition, community, belief. For an hour, drafts and cold stone fade. Festivals made churches warmer, not by fire but by numbers. On Christmas Eve or Candlemas, hundreds crowded shoulder to shoulder. Outside, bells toll in crisp air. Pulling your cloak tight, you step into snow, yet something lingers. The church did not truly warm you, but steadied you. Its walls offered shelter from the wind, its rituals added meaning to cold days, and its community made frost less lonely. Countless villagers had trudged here over the centuries, boots crunching snow, drawn by faith and the promise of togetherness. The fire may not have blazed, but the spirit did, and that was its own form of warmth. At home by your hearth, you remember candle glow, murmured prayers, the faint touch of warmth in a side chapel. Survival wasn't measured solely in logs and embers. Sometimes it was measured in voices lifted together, in colored light, in the stubborn faith that cold could not conquer the soul. The memory of stained glass and incense lingers as you step into the deep winter night. Stars glint overhead, cold and merciless, and snow crunches underfoot. Across villages, towns, monasteries, and castles, people battled the same enemy in countless ways. Survival was always a patchwork quilt of fire, fabric, faith, and fellowship. Chronicles and archaeology confirm that no single method sufficed. Hearths smoked but gave light, braziers warmed but risked suffocation, tapestries softened stone but never banished drafts, coal burned hot but fouled the air, peat smoldered steadily but left homes choking. Every choice carried trade-offs, and people balanced them daily. Smoke for warmth, risk for comfort, scarcity for endurance. Folklore and diaries describe winter as a living being, a wolf pressing at the door, a giant crouching on the roof. Fire became a loyal guardian, an ember-fed sentry holding the beast at bay. Banking coals each night was arming that guardian, giving it strength to fight until dawn. Imagine leaning over your hearth, whispering encouragement to the flames, as though they could obey. Scholars debate the harshness of medieval winters. Some argue climate shifts, like the Little Ice Age, made the 15th and 16th centuries particularly severe. Oh, you are warm. Warm enough to dream. As the story concludes, the fire softens. The crackle grows gentler, the glow dims, and the room is filled with a hush of comfort. You breathe deeply, letting your shoulders relax, your body sink into imagined blankets. The journey through medieval winters has been long and tiring. You have moved through smoky cottages, drafty castles, steaming bathhouses, and frost fairs on frozen rivers. You have sat with peasants and lords alike, shared warmth with monks, merchants, and neighbors. Through it all, you've learned that warmth was never just fire, It was persistence, small victories over cold, never letting the ember die. Let your mind revisit those images one more time. The child carrying an ember in a clay pot, peat smoke curling into a cottage, tapestries glowing in firelight, laughter echoing across ice. Each memory is a thread woven into a quilt. Now, lying here, you can wrap yourself in that quilt, knowing humanity has always endured. The cold outside may be real, or only imagined. Either way, you are safe in this moment, sheltered by walls, by words, by centuries of stories showing that survival is never solitary. People have always huddled close, whispered charms, shared coals, and spun tales in the dark. And you, listening now, are part of that same chain. Let your breath slow, your thoughts lighten. The fire is low, the night is gentle, and you can drift into warmth deeper than any hearth. Sleep well. Dream softly.